Hi, I'm Michael Prenez-Isbell. I'm currently manager for emerging technologies for Condé Nast. I'm using Tinderbox to go through various WWDC talks and posting the results up on the web. This is the session 214, customizing iOS7 apps, and this is the app that demos the tic-tac-toe sample code and has three main trunks: what's new, advanced topics, and custom controls. So they started off talking about UI status bar style, and status bar in general is different. It used to be controlled by the UI application. Now it's controlled by the view controllers. And there are two basic styles: the default and the light content. And of course, one of the other big things that's different is the UI views go up under the status bar. And down a little bit below, it talks about how there are basically, two styles of status bar, and you have to pick one. Either the old style pre-iOS7 or the new style with its default behavior. Content of view controller now laid out beneath the status bar. The startup images for your app, the 320 by 480 and the 320 by 520 or whatever it is, have to be full-sized images, but they do not include the status bar in either case. The live status bar will be drawn at startup. So if you have it so big that it's got a status bar, I'm actually not sure what will happen. Maybe we'll draw over it. And you can specify your launch images with a key in info.plist, UI launch images. Colors. So tint color has a whole new purpose, and that's to provide what's known as a key color for the app. And it's inherited throughout the app. There's some more detail on that once we get to advanced topics. It turns out each view has a selected tint color and an inherited tint color. And when it's nil, it picks up a default tint color. So there are actually three. And this is basically how you set it. If I set it here on the window, it's actually going to filter down through all the views and subviews. If I had specific tint colors set on subviews, it would not filter down to those. So you can actually change the tint color of subview trees. Which is nice. Change tint color on nav bar, now changes foreground. Yes, so before, when you change the tint color on a nav bar, it would change the background of the nav bar. Now what it does is it changes those fine line drawn icons and the color of the line that they're drawn in. And it's a great effect. There's a new property, bar tint color. If you want to change the background color to make it behave like it did before. You can set your custom images, and it notes there's a difference here in size, and in both cases it's a 20-point size, and that's the size of the status bar, so that's what you have to look out for. It's giving an example here of setting background images on the nav bar, and there's a difference between these two calls: UI bar position top attached and UI bar position top. And you'll either take into account the status bar again as you set the background image, or you won't, and the positioning will be affected that way. Shadow is no longer an option, but you can set a shadow image as a property on the nav bar now, or on the view rather, and it'll size properly. I've never used that much, so I don't really care. All bars are now translucent, and that means that background images on bars are analyzed for their transparency. All right, and that means that it's going to look at it and decide if part of the image that you're giving it is transparent, and it will set the tint color based on its decision, which is kind of interesting. Headers and footers are opaque, so when your UI view controller lays out the views, it's going to look at your header and footer, and it's going to decide, is it translucent? If it is, it's going to shove the view controller up under the header and footer. And if the header and footer are opaque, it's going to fit the view between those two views. So that has some effect. Buttons. Buttons now have no bezels, which means a button is usually either a text or an icon. Those very spare icons again. With back buttons, you can customize the chevron by specifying a back indicator image, and you also want to give it a mask image, which means it's going to create a little triangle which will cover up the text and give it a nice dimmed or faded look when you're popping back at appropriate times. So you have to also set that. Tab bars are now white by default, but you can use a bar style set default in black. Different images for selected and unselected states. This used to be handled differently. Now there's a selected image property, which you can just set. Table views, no more rounded rects for group views. So the new group view on the table views is very different. It's more like, it just sort of is more generally usable. It doesn't stop you in your tracks, and doesn't look completely different. It's nice. Selection bar is a more subtle gray, no inversion of content color. So that means when you're selecting an item in a table view, before it used to be that bright blue with white text, now it's just a very subtle gray, and it doesn't change the color of the text that you're actually selecting. You can still set a select background view if you want to do a custom selection. Bar looker, UI button type system. This is the general button type used in iOS 7, and comes with animations and actions and so forth you can take advantage of. It's very useful. It's recommended that you use auto layout. I don't know what context I made that note in. Anyway, asset catalog, a feature which I still haven't used, but which is in every Xcode project front and center now. The recommendation, of course, is that you combine all your images in one resource file, and you can set different images for different devices and scales. So I think I'll probably take this weekend off and look at that. That was section 1. That's in general what's changed. So what's changed is in large part how view controllers interact with status bars, tint colors, how buttons look and react, how back buttons are set, how tab bars and selection bars on table views look, and how table bars look, and what kind of buttons to use, and use the asset catalog. So that's the general, right? So advanced customization. Now this is where it gets into some detail about the tint color. Notice there are basically two kinds. There's specific tint color, and there's the inherited tint color. Again, if you set it on a window or on a super view, it'll filter through all your views, but you can also set a specific tint color. And then there's the third case where it's nil, in which case it will go grab the default. There are two different tint colors in each view conceptually. It notes there's only one tint color property, but you have to know where it's coming from. And you have to know because the setter can set the view on the specific view, but the getter property can go and get the inherited color if there's a nil on the specific view. So you have to know about that. Blah, 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 that's all about that. When you show alerts and action sheets, the background is desaturated, and there's a property, a UI tint adjustment mode, which will set the kind of desaturation that will happen and the various stages and so forth, and you can play with that and deal with that. Okay, this is the 32-minute mark in the lecture. Navbar and Fave button. So they go through and they show the favorites button, and they note that the button is gold and yet it gets a tint. And that's because there are two kinds of images now. There's an image original and there's an image as a template. And if an image is a template, it will draw an outline around the image using the tint color. So it's a great way of getting a little icon. But sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you want it to be treated as an actual image, and so you use UI image rendering mode in order to do that. Okay, 39 minutes in. I needed to go over here. So the view controller provides the status bar background. What that means is that the status bar is conscious of the view controller, that it's the specific view controller that it's over. So when you're sliding through view controllers, the status bar is going to have a color sense of what's beneath it, and it will adjust its translucent properties accordingly. Before, the status bar properties were set on UI application, but now they're set on the view controller to make it easy to have the view controllers match the status bar. And you can use these two methods, preferred status bar style and preferred status bar hidden, to set the style. You can also apply it to container view controllers. So, and when you have a container view controller, you probably want to have one of the child view controllers, which is, probably the main one, and probably the one that's under the status bar, be the one that determines the status bar style, and you can use these two methods to do that. So that's actually very nicely thought out. Because that was my question. What about container view controllers? Because I use those all the time in the app I'm writing. And you can decide which of the old system or the new system you're going to use with this switch in info.plist. Okay? Okay, then we go back over here. And once you set it, you can say needs status bar appearance updated if you make a change to it. And they have a nice little piece of code inside the talk where they show putting this change inside an animation block so that changes to the status bar from, for example, dimmed or from black to white is animated. It's a nice effect. And it's about 41 minutes and 30 seconds in the talk. Making custom controls. So they talk about this using a couple of examples. One thing they start out is they share how they make UI kit controls. And if you had asked me, I would have said, well, they probably, because it's Apple and they probably go back and use core graphics and start at the bottom and Quartz 2D. But as it turns out, they've got enough, working at this point that they use UI kit just like we do. So if they've got, for steppers, for example, they just used image views and buttons to, put the thing together. And the same with the ratings control on the tic-tac-toe. They used an image view and 5 UI buttons and, just set it up. If you have a button inside a control, you're going to want to make a UI button type custom, right? And then you're going to want to capture the targets and so forth. You're opting out of system animations and appearances. And the other choice is to subclass UI button and override these 3 methods. You can do it that way too. I guess I didn't make a note about, let me see, did I down here further? Maybe more about UI buttons down here, so let me just keep going. What I wanted to say here about buttons was there is a way to, so you have a button inside a container control. You want to have the touch button then pop out to the container and have that target container act on the button's touch. And there's a way of doing that, and that's roughly at this point in the talk also. Okay, for creating dynamic images, pretty straightforward for anyone who's done Quartz 2D. You just do a UI graphics begin image context, get the image from the context, and then end the graphic context. Pretty easy. There's a new UI Bezier path. Is apparently improved and draws better rounded rectangles, which is nice. So when you want to do this, I'm not sure what they were talking about here. I don't remember this part of the talk, but they were set the image on the image view. Oh, because they were setting something internally in the some image in the container control. They wanted to use resizable image with cap insets and use the UI edge insets, which is used all over the place, to say, well, bring it in 10 points all the way around. When you set up an image inside some kind of a control. So they're doing that. And here they're specifying the rendering mode. And I didn't specify values for the rendering mode, so I should go out and put that in at some point. And so here's an example. So when you subclass the UI control and you have a touch button, you're going to, the touch button is going to be touched, and you're going to pass on the action. So you're going to say send actions for control events. And then on the ratings control, you're going to add the target, add the button, to this larger control, and say pick up that action, fire this method, change rating, when the button is touched, and capture. And also there's a line of code to capture the new rating status in a property on the rating control. So it's actually pretty cool. They also have a count view control, and they do something kind of interesting here. So they want to draw a line, and then what they want to do is they want to pick up the tint color. And so they set the tint color before they actually do the drawing and draw rect. So that's kind of neat. And they're doing a little tally marks thing, which is very easy to draw, just little lines, which Chord Studio is, of course, very good at. And so there's a method that fires tint color did change when it does that, and it does that when adjustments are occurring as well. So when you're dimming or anything like that, at any time when the tint color changes, it'll pick that up and you can have a chance to react to it and do stuff. And once you've done that, especially when you're using DrawRect, you're going to want to do a set needs display to redraw the colors. And then there's some accessibility stuff and stuff about accessibility labels, which I didn't record because it's pretty straightforward. It's basically, setting the localized string elements on the controls and doing that. So that's my little gathering of knowledge about session 214, customizing iOS 7 apps from WWDC 2013.